Hi, I'm Fergus. I'm head brewer here at Adnams. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the beers we make. The beer we're going to talk about now is our Ease Up IPA. So Ease Up IPA isn't that old. I guess it's only about 3-4 years old since we started doing it. So originally the idea for Ease Up IPA was to try and recreate some of the sort of new styles that were coming out of the US. Particularly this idea of a session IPA. So the American craft beer sort of boom since the early 80s sort of had really taken the idea of IPA, of the old English style IPA, but gone back to what that sort of really meant originally, which was higher ABV, higher hopping rates. And they'd used that, or they'd made that beer, those IPAs with American hops, so much more grapefruity, much more citrus than you get from sort of historical English IPAs, really. But I guess because of the ABV, they found obviously lots of people couldn't drink very much of it, so they started looking at this idea of session IPA. And I guess in the UK, the idea of session, it's part of what that session drink is part of what we're sort of used to, really. But for the US, coming from those really high ABVs, session for them still tends to be higher alcohol than we would normally associate with a session IPA or session beer. So for our session beer, it's 4.6%. We call it Ease Up because a lot of the session IPAs coming out of the US were sort of called easy something, and we thought we'd take that idea and sort of tweak it a little bit and call this Ease Up. So as you'd expect, because we're trying to recreate the sort of American style, we use lots of American hops in there. So we use some Simcoe, some Centennial, some Citra, some Cascade, a little bit of Amarillo. And what we're trying to do is get a quite broad range of sort of flavors in there. We don't want any particular hop to be dominant, which makes it easier when it comes to trying to supplying hops and buying hops and making sure we have enough hops for this particular beer. But we want a really broad range. So we get some pine, we get some citrus, we get that sort of orange peel note in there. We also get a little bit of sort of mosaic-y characteristic in there, so a bit more blueberry as well. So we want this really broad range of flavors in there. And then we want to sit that on top of quite a slightly more complex mix of malts than we probably do for lots of other beers. There's a bit of Munich in there, as well as the sort of the low-colour pale ale. We use a bit of Munich, just to give it a bit more biscuity characteristic, and then some oats as well, just so it has a bit more body to sit on, because what we're trying to do is pack the same amount of hops as you'd put into an IPA into a lower ABV beer, really, so it packs much more of a punch, really. So obviously heavily dry hopped, as well as the hops that go into the kettle, and the hops that we put into the kettle we put in at the end of the boil, so we try and keep as much of the aromatics in there as possible. So as you'd expect, it's relatively light in colour. Lots of citrus, lots of grapefruit, and a bit of that pine as well. What we don't want to do is make this beer too similar to some of the other beers we do, so we want lots of that pine characteristic coming through to sort of balance out those fruits as well. And that's Ease Up. Cheers.